Have you thought about investing in property but haven't yet gotten started, or maybe a bit worried about the risks, or not really sure where to start? Well, today we are going live to you to answer all your questions. We're going to go through why property, we're going to talk about all the risks and how to protect yourself against those risks, and how to find the right strategy and property for you. And today, my name's Marissa, I'm from Rise High. I'm joined by Richard, who's one of our amazing mortgage brokers at Rise High Financial Solutions. And of course, one of the things that we love to do at Rise High is to educate and empower our clients to build wealth through property, because we are property investors ourselves. Yep. We've seen firsthand the power of property and how it can help you to build a passive income that can support your lifestyle beyond your working years. So we really love to give our clients that financial independence to be able to retire independently and not rely on the government and superannuation. So before we get into the nuts and bolts, I might sort of ask you, Richard, for what
Yep.
you're obviously a property investor yourself.
Yep.
You started investing quite young, as did I. So
Yep.
I'd love to hear about your journey before we get started. And we also are taking questions live today, so please feel free to post any questions or comments, because we are here to answer them live. We'll be with you for about 30 minutes and we'd love to answer your questions today. So
Absolutely.
Getting started,
Yeah.
Richard, what's your property investment journey been, and
Yeah.
how have you why do you invest in property?
Yeah, definitely. So my wife and I, our first goal, as when we were, I suppose, building our deposit, was to enter the property market like everyone, to have a house of our own. We're a little bit more strategic, and again, not overcomplicating the process, but we just thought as we entered the market, we would buy something that would turn into a really nice investment.
Yep.
Rather than be our forever home first off the bat, I suppose, which has turned out really, really well for us. So that first purchase for us was, hey, it was really homey. We liked it, but we could see all the key features and all the things we could do to the property ourselves, getting our hands dirty to improve the value. And I suppose, looking for a quick opportunity to, most of all, improve the value of the home. Then we were able to utilise equity actually in that home quite quickly, surprisingly enough, to then leverage that home into another one, which was really exciting. And what I found through the process, and it was through the advice of yourself and James, was to have a clear goal in mind of what that property needs to do for you.
Yes.
Whether you do it today or whether you do it in 10 years, it doesn't matter, but invest in it knowing what the outcome needs to look like. So the second property we did, we knew that could be developed, and that was always our clear goal from the start. So even though the home, wasn't as desirable to live in, it's been rented out comfortably, and we know our future goal is to develop that at some stage in our life.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
It's great. And that's sort of a very common path that many people take, to get into the property market.
Yeah.
Initially, it might be through purchasing their own home,
Yep.
or they might want to rent vest,
Yeah,
where they
definitely.
actually, rent where they want to live and buy an investment property that's within their borrowing capacity.
Yeah.
And it's just really that first step of getting your foot in the door is the hardest.
It is, yeah.
Once you actually are in the door, once you're in the market, you can actually see that equity growth.
Yeah.
It all becomes a lot easier. So what I want to just touch on first is some of the reasons why it's really important to invest, because people online might think, oh, I've thought about it, but I don't really know why it's important. So let's just talk about some of the big things here, because it scares me every time when I look at the stats, but there's only about 3% of Australians that are retiring independently on incomes of over $50,000 a year. So $50,000 a year is not a lot of money for most people, and only 3% of Australians are currently achieving that level of income in retirement. And that's mainly because people haven't taken responsibility of building their own financial assets during their working life to be able to actually have that income themselves. But I mean, what are your key reasons and key drivers that you think people should think about when it comes to why invest?
Yeah, I think to maybe add a thought or a question to the listeners is that, $50,000 is a lot of money when you can rely on potentially going back to work tomorrow to earn that, knowing it's going to be ongoing. It's not well, effectively, if you're earning more than that, it's not a lot to lead a lifestyle that people become accustomed to. So I suppose what I'm saying is the thought of what you want your lifestyle to look like in retirement is probably the starting point, and then we work our way back from there. And I think you're right, it's an afterthought.
Yeah. A lot of people think about it too late. They think about it, 5 to 10 years before they plan to retire, or even a couple of years before they plan to retire. And it's, with investing, you really need time in the market. So the longer you have, the earlier you start, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, and I think you're under less pressure for the Hail Mary, maybe that one property that needs to succeed for you, otherwise you won't reach your goal. And we see that as well. And it's kind of a little bit of pressure on all parties to try to make that one purchase or that second purchase of property to work, versus, like you said, getting in early and letting time do its job.
It's so exciting when we meet young people that are thinking about this, because they can just have such a great advantage because they've got time on their side. And I think, one thing that really scares me is that Australians do have the she'll be right attitude a little bit. So, we think, we've got the pension that we can fall back on, but the pension is, I think the average amount is about just over $20,000 a year per adult, which is pretty low when you consider whether you could actually live on that. And because of our ageing population in Australia, most people won't be eligible for the pension by the time they reach that age. And then we've obviously got compulsory superannuation if you have been employed during your working life. But the average Australian male is retiring on $200,000 in their super, which sounds like a lot of money, but if they've got a 20-year retirement, that's giving them $10,000 a year to live on. So it's really not going to cut the mustard. And people need to realise that they need to take control of it themselves. They can't rely on superannuation and the government to, fund their retirement. So when we meet young people, I mean, how excited do you get when you meet a young person that's keen about learning about investing? It's so good because you just know how good it's going to be.
Yeah, 100%. And we do see it quite a lot. And it's then, them taking on our sort of advice and really entering the market. And then
we know that there's going to be a lot of growth coming forward in Adelaide. So it's such a great time to be getting in.
It is. It really is. And the excitement that these people, our clients, have once they've committed and then action their goal that they set out is really rewarding.
Yeah, awesome. And I think you said a really good point earlier about it's really important to start with your end goal in mind in terms of what you actually want to achieve and what income you want to have in retirement. But I also think the other thing you need to question is, when do you want to be able to retire? Because if you are relying on superannuation or the pension, the government actually prescribes what age you will retire, but you might want to retire earlier. You might not want to work until you're 75. You might want to have the choice to retire at 50. So the only way that you can actually have that choice to be able to make that decision yourself is to actually be self-funded and actually have assets that can support you with passive income.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so that's why invest. We need to move on to why property, because obviously there's so many different investment vehicles and they've all got pros and cons. We're not here to say negative things about any other investment vehicles, but we probably are a little bit biased. We do love property because we are property investors ourselves. So we'll get into why property. Before we do, a few shout outs. Hi Emily, Tina, Brad, Sam, Todd, Jay, Sean, Sarah. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. Really love having you here today, and we're here to take all of your questions and comments, so send them through. We'd love to chat with you live as we progress. So why property? Well, why property for you, Richard?
Yeah, well, we were young and we sort of had a longer game plan. We thought that, and I think we had some people in our sphere of influence, parents and whatever, that we'd seen property work well for. And we just thought, look, let's jump in with a long vision, and it was a safer bet. I think it was for us. We could see it, we could sort of touch it, we could see where we could add value to it. With our own, getting our hands dirty, and
I think that's the thing. Property does feel like, it's very consistent.
That's right.
It doesn't have the volatility of some other asset classes like shares. So
Yep.
it feels like a much safer asset, especially amongst what we've seen in the last sort of 12 months, with the global pandemic.
Definitely.
Property has actually responded really well
Yep.
to that, as opposed to the volatility that's been presented in some other investment vehicles. So I guess what you're saying is felt by a lot of property investors, that it does feel safer.
Yeah.
It has had consistent and predictable growth
Yep.
over the historic long term.
Yeah.
So we can only hope that consistent, predictable growth will continue moving forward.
That's right. And I think at the time we probably didn't realise the stats, but being in the market for quite some time, we can see in our own little sort of investment journey that the numbers or the stats themselves have played out for us as well. And back to the point of sort of time in the market. So it's been rewarding, and I think you probably hit the nail on the head with property is consistency. One other point for us in our journey was just buying what we could afford to hold property, or we had to be forced to sell it. So leaving us with the choice of the right time to sell or to make our next move. So that was another.
That's such a good
strategy.
point, buying what you can afford, and we'll come back to that in a minute.
Perfect.
Because there's a couple of other points about why I think we see a lot of people choose property, and that's people like myself. I consider myself to be a bit of a lazy investor.
Yep.
And I'm, because of the fact that, I have a busy life,
Yep.
Run a business, have kids, you've got kids,
Yeah.
you're busy in work as well. So property investment's great, that you can get a great property manager, let them do all the work, you just collect the income, and it's sort of all under control. You don't really have to, it's not something that you have to be actively involved in. You can be if you want to be. So I really like that aspect of it.
Definitely.
I love the tax benefits.
Yes.
But we need to also talk about the leverage.
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
One of the best things about property investment is that you do have the ability to leverage, which means using the bank's money more so than any other vehicle class. And that's because, why is that?
Well, the bank, from a bank's perspective, they're happy to take on another security. That's their, security blanket to lend you money. Because
property has been such a reliable asset class historically. So the banks are happy to lend 90-95% depending on why you're buying the property.
Definitely. And so the banks, got themselves covered, but what it allows the individual to do is leverage their previous hard work or their previous decent investment to then help fund the next and the next and the next. And what we've seen over the last 6 to 12 months, when property, like you said, has been in the spotlight and had some good energy behind it, is it's allowed the savvy investor to make, some leveraging decisions and keep an eye on the market and strike as good opportunities have come up, which has been really, really exciting. So, leveraging what you've currently built up is a great way to grow out the portfolio that you've
and of
started.
course at Rise High we're experts on helping you to leverage your equity to build your portfolio.
Absolutely.
So we'd love to help you with that. I'm going to move on to some of the risks, because let's face it, if there's people online that have been thinking about property investing but have been procrastinating, it's probably because they're scared.
Yeah.
And we've all seen those horror stories on Today Tonight or current affair programs of the tenant from hell, trashing the property, doing damage, not paying rent, doing a runner, all of those sorts of things.
Definitely.
So that's, that is scary to think of that. So let's talk about mitigating some of those risks, because all of those things can happen, but there are certain things that you can do to mitigate your risks. So as a property investor yourself, Richard, what are some of the things you've done to mitigate your risks?
Yeah, definitely. We touched on one earlier, and that was employing a really, really good property manager.
Yeah.
So one who could thoroughly screen the tenant, really knows how to break down the tenant, understand, checking references, where those references are coming from, checking financial background. That has been a huge win for us, having someone in our team that can do that thoroughly. We've had,
because they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
They know how to find the tenant. They know how to talk to the tenant. They know the legislation. They know what your rights are, what the tenant's rights are.
100%.
Yeah.
insurance is another one. Like at the end of the day,
absolutely essential.
we
So
are,
just to clarify,
yeah.
that's landlord's insurance and building insurance.
Yeah, 100%. So taking out those insurances for us was a no-brainer, because although the property manager does their job, people's circumstances change. So the tenant might have been great at the start and something might have happened in their life and they become a poor tenant. Then if we're losing rent or any other things, we wanted to be covered for that. Again, just to give us peace of mind with some money at stake. So.
And a good landlord's insurance policy will protect you against any tenant damage, will protect you against a tenant doing a runner before their lease runs out, it will protect you against rent default, loss of rent, while the house is being repaired. So it really does protect you against a lot of those potential risks.
100%.
Of course, there's not only tenant-related risks when you're investing. So when you are investing in property, you are taking on more debt.
Yes.
So you do have some risks associated with that.
Yes.
You know, because interest rates can move up and down, your personal circumstances might change, your personal employment situation might change. So what are some of the things that people can do, or, you know, you and your clients have done to mitigate some of those risks?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose with the home loans themselves, it's just strategizing around what is the best way for that property to be structured. And a lot of the times, if it's a long-term buy and hold, that typically the market's fixed rates are our go-to for our investors. We've certainly taken that approach. And the reason for that is then consistency of repayment, month by month by month for a certain period of time.
And it won't fluctuate. So you remove that
100%.
risk completely, really. The interest rate risk, you've removed it then, haven't you?
You have. You've removed that variable volatility. And, in some cases, the numbers might make sense for us to be, fixed at a certain price point before we know maybe we're doing comfortably.
So that sort of eliminates the interest rate risk, but then in relation to the risk of changes to your personal circumstances, of course there's a range of insurance policies that you can take out that would protect you in those circumstances, like life insurance,
definitely,
income protection insurance,
there are
trauma cover. So, and these are things that if you are worried about those things, you can mitigate all of those risks really easily by getting good insurance advice.
Yeah, and I think that's got to be the case regardless of whether you're investing, buying a home. Like, you just need to make sure, worst case scenario, you, your family, your loved ones are looked after. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. Yeah.
And that sort of flows on to just a little point here, is that you really should have a will once you own property. You should have a will anyway, but it's not really a risk or anything, but I just thought of it and I just wanted to throw out that point there. So make sure you speak to a lawyer and get some advice about a will.
Yeah, your estate planning is very, very important.
Really important. A few more shout outs. Hi Anthony, James, Jeff, Rachel, Brian, Chris, thanks for tuning in. We're here live to answer your questions, so please send them through. Okay, we've talked about why invest, why property. We've talked about the risks and how to mitigate them.
Yes.
So let's talk about what type of property we should buy.
Yeah.
We like to talk about, at Rise High, we like to say, well, you need to buy an investment grade property. So you were saying before that when you started your investment journey, you identified a property that actually ticked the investment grade property boxes.
Yep.
So let's talk about what makes a property investment grade.
Definitely. Well, first of all, that can be a very broad question depending on who the individual buyers are.
Yes. Well, it comes back to your goals of actually what you want to achieve.
100%. So if I can use the example of my own property as a guide, it was, we knew we had trade skills in my family.
Yeah.
So when we walked into this home that had zero backyard, that had pretty ugly carpets and ugly lino, that was a big turn-off for owner-occupiers. They were looking at this thinking, there is a lot of money to invest in this property just to bring it up to a livable standard that we would like. For us, we saw opportunity.
Yeah. And so often, if you can do a little bit of work to the property yourself and add a bit of value, it actually makes a huge difference to your portfolio and how you build your wealth.
Definitely. So there are the different types of property.
So you've really been looking for properties that you can add value to. That's been one of your checkbox
Absolutely.
criteria.
Yeah.
I'd probably also add that you really want to find an investment property that's close to things tenants need.
Yep.
So close to shops, close to schools, employment, healthcare, transport,
Yep.
and that pretty much covers most metro suburbs.
Yeah.
I would say. Generally, if you're investing regionally, it's a lot higher risk.
Yep.
So, but if you stick to the suburbs and the capital cities, then they're much lower risk. In doing so.
Yeah, definitely. And the types of properties, or the types of things you can do with properties, there is the facelift, which we were looking for in this particular option. There's the rundown, maybe old home that can be subdivided or built into multiple properties. There are also new homes as well. So whether that's a brand new home built or
which
one
might be good for someone that's looking for more tax deductions.
100%.
So it's really about driving what actually you're investing for. Is it for capital growth? Is it for development? Is it for improvement? Is it for cash flow? Knowing those goals up front can actually lead you down the path of what type of property you should be buying. And we actually are holding a seminar in a few months about different property types and the pros and cons of each type and what you should be looking for if you're looking for certain outcomes.
Definitely.
So stay tuned for that. We also have a property seminar next Tuesday. We've got a few spots left in that, so you need to register quickly. That is the 4th of May. So we're hoping that you can come along to that as well. So once you sort of know what type of property you need to buy, or maybe even before you know what type of property you need to buy, I think the secret weapon as a property investor is building your team of experts.
Yeah.
So who do you need in your team?
Yeah.
Obviously you need a rise high mortgage broker, that's a given.
Yep.
But who else do you need in your team, Richard?
So, to make the transaction work, you need to have your building insurance, your landlord insurance.
Yeah.
You need to have a really strong and capable conveyancer
Yes.
to help you with the transaction, making sure
And
your
we
contract
can, of course, recommend people if you need any direction.
100%.
Yeah.
You're then needing to employ your property manager, making sure
you
you've
need
got
a good property manager.
Someone in your team that can support you there. Rolling over to, as you said earlier, I think it's a good point as you're doing these transactions to then get your will updated or create a will, get your estate planning.
Definitely. So you need a lawyer for that. And I'd also say you need an accountant, pretty important.
Absolutely needing an
Make
accountant.
sure that you're maximising your tax deductions and getting your ownership structure decisions right.
Yeah, and flowing onto that, or maybe side by side, is having a depreciation schedule put together as well, because a large part of the investment journey for people is where can we save some tax, and having a depreciation schedule put together on a property you've just purchased is a fantastic idea. And you'd be surprised. I think you've done some talks around this subject in the past, but you can depreciate a lot of things in a home.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a good video on depreciation, so you can find that on our YouTube page.
And that sounds like a lot of people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, as you said, we have really strong, connection in that space. We surround ourselves by good people, professional businesses, and ultimately, rather than jumping to Google, I'd back in the recommendations.
Yeah. We've had a question come in from Sally. Thanks for your question, Sally. Sally asks, when is the right time to buy? Properties seem more expensive currently. Is it worth investing now? So, okay, so just to answer that question, Adelaide market has been quite flat for some time now.
Yep.
And the property market does, they talk about the fact that it doubles every 10 years. And when we look at the long-term historic figures, that's definitely been the case in terms of a long-term average. But I actually did some research back when I was writing the book, The Rise High Investor. And what I found is that it doesn't exactly take 10 years every cycle to go through a full cycle. Sometimes it takes 6, sometimes it takes 15, and the long-term average has been 10. We've had pretty flat market in South Australia since probably for the last sort of 15 to 20 years almost, I would say.
Yep.
And what we're seeing now is an incredible catch up of where we should have grown previously. So obviously the market is going quite crazy at the moment, but we just see that this is going to continue going higher and higher. So if you are thinking of investing or buying a home, the sooner you can get in, the better, because it's not going to go backwards.
No.
So it'd be really unlikely, and that's what happens with Adelaide market. You know, it sort of goes up and then it might stabilise for a while, but we rarely see in Adelaide those drops. We rarely see the dips. So what we do see is an increase, stabilisation, an increase, stabilisation. So is now a great time to buy? Well, interest rates are at historic low, so money is incredibly cheap. Rental returns are fantastic.
They are. Yep.
There's huge demand for Adelaide properties, which means that not only from people in Adelaide, but we're getting a lot of inquiries from people interstate. And definitely the feedback that we're getting from all the agents about the market at the moment leads to suggest that the market's going to be hot for a long time to come. So if you wait too long, it's only going to get harder to get in. I think, you know. Do you have anything to add to that, Richard?
Yeah, I do.
What are your
feelings
around
that? I do agree that, you know, the market certainly hot. It's certainly moving. There's a lot of intensity from buyers. You know, lack of stock as well. I think that trend is slowly swinging a little bit. I'm seeing a little bit more stock come to the market, and I believe agents
but it's selling so quickly.
It's selling very quickly. I think getting into the market is a good opportunity, but bringing it back to the basics. What are we investing for? And just being prepared to go and know that, okay, at this moment in time, the market is doing X, Y, or Z, and it's hot and it's aggressive to buy. So we would help you and I suppose coach you on how we can get you into the market and negotiate. But I think, get into it. Prices aren't going to move. Energy might come out.
They're not going to go down.
That's right. Well,
they're going to sort of just keep going up at a rapid rate until we get to a new level of normal. And I think you just said a really powerful thing earlier that I don't think we've stressed enough. So I'm going to stress it now in this point to answer Sally's question, is that the most important thing when you're investing in property is to buy something that you can afford to hold forever. It sounds really simple, but so many people buy a property in the next boom suburb and forget to take into consideration that this property is going to burn a hole in their pocket every week, that they just cannot, it's not sustainable for them.
100%.
You know, so it's really super important that you actually do the numbers, that's something that we can help you to do, to make sure that no matter what happens, if interest rates go up, if someone loses their job, no matter what happens, you can actually afford to keep the property so that you're never in a position where you're forced to sell.
That's right.
That's something that you did when you started investing, and it's so important.
Yeah, that's right. It just, first of all, it takes the stress out of the family, especially when there's turbulence. It can be hard when you think the next investment needs to be in a glitz and glamour type area, maybe for a price that doesn't make sense. The numbers for the investment need to make sense. And, you know, we can touch on that probably at a later time, the actual numbers, but it's simplifying down to this property. The reason we bought this property is to improve our retirement. So it's got to be able to sustain us and get us through into retirement. And if we've over leveraged early, we'll have a negative experience. We might sell too soon. We might be forced to sell. And then we're back to a square one position, maybe a year later, maybe 5 years later, and thinking we need to start this whole thing again. Buying what you can afford to hold is just super massive. Important.
So that brings us, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but we are running a 1 hour seminar next Tuesday, 4th of May. There's a couple of spots left if you want to register. Get in quickly on our website, risehigh.com.au. We also have a 3-hour property investment strategy workshop, which is going to be getting in and actually working out your own property investment plan. And that is on Saturday, the 19th of June. So there will be some details about that on our website as well. We also will later in the year have a seminar on choosing different investment property types. So if you want to invest but not sure what to buy, then that will be a really good one for you to attend as well. Thanks, Richard, for joining us today. Thank you to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We really love to educate and empower, and this is a topic we're really passionate about. So if we can help you with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. We hope you have a great day. Thanks. Bye.